India meant far more to the Beatles than what most experts and fans assume. When I researched my book on the Beatles in India to mark the 50th anniversary of them coming to Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's ashram in Rishikesh, I was fascinated by the many dimensions of this relationship and how much there was to discover. The story of the Beatles in India is an amazing paradox, bringing together old and new, tradition and modernity. People like me who grew up in the 1960s, nicknamed the Beatles generation, embraced them as symbols of modern Western culture, rejecting the old ways of our parents, even as the lads from Liverpool, repudiating their own cultural mores, reached out to ancient wisdom in India. The journey of the Beatles to Rishikesh also brings into play two extraordinary Indian luminaries in the tale. Pandit Ravi Shankar, the sitar legend, described by George as the godfather of international music, left his special imprint by opening the door to Indian culture and faith for his protege and his bandmates. The unique, if somewhat controversial personality of the Maharishi, perhaps the most influential of the several Indian gurus who reached out to the West, presents an interesting contrast. When I started tracing the path that the Beatles took to Rishikesh, I was struck by the crucial role that Ravi Shankar played in George's life. Some kind of mystic karmic connection between the two pulled first George, and he in turn pushed other members of the band towards a spiritual quest in India. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi would grab the headlines later for being the spiritual guide of the Beatles, but it was a sitar maestro who opened the doors for them to India's culture and faith. George's passion for India grew in leaps and bounds ever since he curiously picked up a sitar on the sets of the Beatles film Hep. The real turning point came in September 1966 when he, along with his newly married wife Patty, accompanied Ravi Shankar on a cultural odyssey across our land, from the Ellora caves to the Dal Lake in Kashmir, to the Taj in Agra, to the banks of the Ganges in Benares, among many other landmarks of Indian civilization. Interestingly, when I met Patty in London to record her memories of India, she recalled her trip with Ravi Shankar far more vividly than the Rishikesh retreat nearly 2 years later. George's liaison with India, instead of marginalizing him in the band, actually helped the till then self-effacing Beatle to play a much larger role. His mates were deeply impressed at how George's India connection amplified his personality, unleashing a hidden creative energy. By the time Patty introduced the Beatles to Maharishi Mahesh Yogi and Transcendental Meditation in the summer of 1967, the entire band had already accepted Indian music as an integral part of their musical evolution. Yet there is little doubt that it was their momentous encounter with Mahesh Yogi in the August of 1967 that was the biggest stepping stone in the Beatles' journey to India. And once again, there was a divine design at work. How else can one explain the dramatic circumstances in which the Beatles, within just a few days, embraced a new guru who would lead them thousands of miles across the ocean to Himalayan ashram? It all happened so swiftly. Attending the Maharishi's lecture in London with a private audience with him afterwards, accompanying him by train the next day to the Bangor Transcendental Meditation camp to be initiated with the secret mantra, and then suddenly hearing that their manager and mentor, Brian Epstein, had died of a drug overdose. Almost overnight, their growing involvement with India acquired a fresh urgency. Devastated by Brian's loss, they clung to the Maharishi, hoping his mantra would protect them from the insecurities that overwhelmed the band. They escaped to Indian jungle, far, far away from their doting fans and studio recordings that had dominated their lives. For the first time since their formation, the Beatles had an opportunity to realize their individual selves beyond their identity as a band. They all had different reasons to be in the ashram. For George, by then a devout Hindu, it was a spiritual home where he would come back again and again till he died several decades later. John hoped that Maharishi's mantra would drive away his inner demons that drugs failed to do, while Paul looked to recharge his batteries. And Ringo simply had to go along with his mates on their magical mystery tour. If the escalating India connection since George discovered the sitar had helped the Beatles evolve into the pioneering musical artists they became from the mid-60s, Rishikesh was the culmination of this journey. But having entered this Himalayan paradise, they would lose it soon after. Ringo and wife were the first to leave, complaining about the food and flying insects. Paul rushed back to manage the Beatles business a few weeks later, and the final nasty squabble between John and the Maharishi no doubt brought an abrupt end to the romance with India. Yet, even as this relationship unraveled, coinciding with the band starting to fall apart, the Beatles displayed the best of their creative genius. Their stay in India influenced many of their songs in the few final post-Rishikesh years that witnessed the astonishing phenomenon of the world's greatest rock band producing some of their finest music even as they drifted apart. Over the past few years, my involvement with the Beatles and India saga has deepened further while directing a documentary film inspired by my book, unearthing exciting archival images and footage on the subject. We also shot extensively at the Beatles ashram ruins in Rishikesh and in many parts of India and in London with eyewitness accounts and expert comments to retell a fairy tale that will never grow stale. It was fun to start the film with a melange of images from Bollywood songs and the Beatles in India to link two parallel worlds of mass entertainment. We also have a fascinating account by Kabir Bedi of his interview with the Beatles, the first ever by an Indian when the band stopped over in Delhi in their first visit to this country. Mahesh recalling Paul McCartney going gaga at his film premiere in Mumbai, and the immortal Shami Kapoor in a Beatles wig dancing away in a mid-60s Bollywood potboiler. They all symbolize the bridge built by the Beatles between India and the West more than half a century ago.